Welcome to Parenti Stuff, the podcast. I am your host, Lumpy Louise, and this is the read and discuss of Democracy for the Few, 9th edition. Chapter 5, Institutions and Ideologies. Just so anyone showing up here that has not been here before, I do a read and discuss, so I actually use Speechify to read out the text from the book, and so that you're not hearing my voice constantly. So it gives me a little break and you guys a little break too. So we're on chapter 5. I have Michael Parenti. The reason why I do this, the reason why I have this account, I've been wanting to do this for a couple of years actually. But Michael Parenti was basically this was the first book I read when I was 1989. I read Democracy, not this edition, of course. This is out in 2010. I think what I read was like the second or third edition, but and then it took me a little bit because I worked my butt off for years, and then I refound Parenti in the last 10 years. I've really he's helped me understand a lot of communism and stuff like that too, a lot of the issues with America and fascism and imperialism. So I do appreciate Parenti. All right, so let me get started with this. We're on chapter 5. It's Institutions and Ideologies, and this chapter is about the institutions and ideologies' interconnection with the political system. Institutions like universities and media are run by a board that is full of wealthy folk, and this small group of affluent people make the decisions on what they deem is best, and those decisions always seem to hold up the current system of capitalism, of which those on the board benefit from. It is said we are now living under an oligarchy, but Parenti is talking plutocracy. There isn't much difference between the terms. Plutocracy is being ruled by a small group of wealthy, and oligarchy is more of a ragtag of people with power, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with wealth. Usually does, but it doesn't necessarily have to do with wealth. It could have things like military or bloodline going with it, but both groups only care to serve themselves, of course. So, yes, I guess it is more uncouth to be an oligarchy, so Democrats are fine with the plutocracy. I guess in the days of yore, or rather the robber barons on to the neolib days, we were a proper plutocracy. Under neoliberalism, it becomes more corporate boards controlling the power of the government than just the handful of wealthy families. So Parenti is probably correct on calling the U.S. a corporate plutocracy because, sure, a lot of eccentric dudes fall into the mix because the faces of corporations love to lean into their zaniness to cover up their various anti-socialness, but these people are still beholden to a somewhat faceless board of shareholders. Okay. When I began the series with Chapter 1, I played a clip of Parenti talking about how he got blacklisted from academia over protesting the Vietnam War. So that was 1970. He was working at the University of Illinois. He went out with his students that were protesting, and the police, that they claim he went after them, but there's you see the photographic evidence. People are taking pictures of him, and he has a big gash on his head because the police got him with a baton on his head. And even when he was in the jail, he was there for 2 days. The cop that hit him said, "Oh, if he didn't move, I would have killed him. I would have got him." So yeah, so he, there's this photographic evidence, you can look it up, and but so it wasn't exactly that he got blacklisted because of the Vietnam War. He got blacklisted because the cops claim that he, he was sentenced and everything for it. So that's when he went and wrote this book. After that, when he was no longer a professor, and even in his first book, the Anti-Communist Impulse, which I will read a little bit from today, he was, saying, like, he was talking about how he like just started writing and doing this stuff because he was so disillusioned anyways. Like, when he started really realizing, as he's a professor, that he was teaching to he was teaching to this, to the capitalism, to the to this hegemony that was like really harmful for the world. I think he was happier doing what he was doing, like writing the books and stuff like that. But he was always a teacher. Like, he always liked to do lectures and stuff like that. So what I'm trying to get at in this chapter is kind of personal. Like, he's talking about the institutions, so he's bringing up like academia, he's bringing up universities and stuff like that. So he's talking kind of personally on this. He's done other writings on it too. All right. So as it goes, history repeats itself. And what happened to Parenti is happening at many universities today. I have this vision of the little guy pleading for something to a bigger guy, and he is pleading for something from a bigger guy, and he is being told no, but behind that guy is a dude in his ear telling him no, and so on and so forth. Like, there's just this line of people saying, nope, you can't do that. No, you can do that. And not that you should feel bad for them one bit, but the presidents of the universities bringing down the hammer blows to the protesting against a genocide are serving the boards that run the institutions. Like, that is their job. However, it's not like the presidents would face death or for defying these orders, unlike the students and academics that, may be in that position now. So here's a quote pulled from Parenti's 1969 book, the one I just talked about, The Anti-Communist Impulse. This quote was written as an editorial in the United States Journal in October 1845. So 1845, before even Marx defined communism. Hey, Dave. It is a truth which every man may see, if he will but look, that all the channels of communication, public and private, through the schoolroom and pulpit and the press, are engrossed and occupied with this one idea, which all these forces are combined to disseminate, that we, the American people, are the most independent, intelligent, moral, and happy people on the face of the earth. So, he's talking about what we have to show to the world. So this whole chapter is like kind of like showing that to like, the American way, that stuff, like our myths about America. Like, he's touching on all that. So in that chapter, when he says that, Parenti writes, since its inception, America has been imbued with a sense of its own historical uniqueness and God-given virtue. To trace all the antecedents that shaped our national self-image is to write a history of the nation itself. Instead, we might delineate those components of the American belief system, those national myths, which tell us something about this country's habitual response to quote-unquote alien faiths, and something about the particular intensity of American anti-communism. In referring to our cherished beliefs as national myths, one need not presume that they are devoid of historical foundation, nor that they are frivolous cultural traits. Myth, as an anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski observed, in fact, is not an idle rhapsody, not an aimless outpouring of vain imagings, but a hard-working, extremely important cultural force. If we define myth as a sacred tales which help enhance and codify belief, giving sanctity to the origins and destiny of the of a people, then the modern American is no more liberated from mythology than the primitive Trobriander. The Trobriand Islands are located off of New Guinea, and Malinowski was there in the 1920s as an anthropologist. They lived as a matriarchal people and stuff like that. So, of course, they were being told they were, primitive, like they like to deem people. Okay, so let me start in section 1. Okay. And I'll be right back.
Institutions and ideologies. In trying to understand the political system, we would do well to look at the wider social context in which it operates, the predominant social institutions, values, and ideologies of our society. Corporate plutocracy. American capitalism represents more than just an economic system, it is a plutocracy, that is, a social order ruled mostly for and by the rich. Along with business enterprises and banks, the nation's cultural institutions, that is, its universities, publishing houses, mass circulation magazines, newspapers, television and radio stations, professional sports teams, foundations, hospitals, churches, private museums, and charities, are mostly chartered as corporations, ruled by boards of directors composed overwhelmingly of affluent business people who exercise final judgment over institutional matters. Consider the university. Private and public institutions of higher education are run by boards of trustees with authority over all matters of capital funding and budget, curriculum and tuition, degree awards, and hiring, firing, and promotion of faculty and staff. Daily decision-making power is delegated to administrators but can be easily recalled by the trustees when they choose. Most trustees are successful business people who have no administrative or scholarly experience in higher education. As trustees, they take no financial risks because their decisions are covered by insurance paid out of the university budget. Their main function seems to be to exercise oligarchic control over the institution. Almost all of our cultural institutions are ruled by non-elected self-perpetuating boards of affluent corporate representatives who are answerable to no one but themselves. We the people have no vote, no portion of the ownership, and no legal decision-making power within these institutions. We are taught to think that capitalism breeds democracy and prosperity. The private enterprise system, it is said, creates equality of opportunity, rewards those who show ability, relegates the slothful to the lower rungs, creates national prosperity, and bolsters democracy. Little is said about how capitalism has supported and flourished under some of the most repressive regimes and impoverished third world nations. The corporate enterprise system places a great deal of emphasis on commercial worth, how to compete and get ahead. As Ralph Nader notes, the free market only stimulates one value in society, the acquisitive, materialistic, profit value. What about the values relating to justice, health, occupational and consumer safety, regard for future generations, and equitable social relations? Among the key purveyors of plutocratic culture is our educational system. From grade school onward, students are given a positive picture of America's history, institutions, and leaders. Teachers tend to concentrate on the formal aspects of government and accord scant attention to the influence that wealthy, powerful groups exercise over political life. Instructors who wish to singer. EXA. A is for Apple Computer, B is for Burger King, C is for Coke, is for Domino's Pizza, or Math. 200. Introduce a more revealing view, invite critical attention from their superiors. High school students who attempt to explore controversial issues in student newspapers have frequently been overruled by administrators and threatened with disciplinary action. School texts seldom give more than passing mention to the courageous history of labor struggle or the corporate exploitation of working people at home and abroad. Almost nothing is said of the struggles of indigenous Americans, indentured servants, small farmers, and Latino, Asian, Middle Eastern, and European immigrants. The history of resistance to slavery, racism, and U.S. expansionist wars goes largely untaught in our classrooms. Schools and media are inundated with informational materials provided free by the Pentagon and large corporations to promote a highly favorable view of the military and to boost privatization, deregulation of industry, and other blessings of the free market. Numerous conservative think tanks and academic centers have emerged, along with conservative journals, conferences, and endowed chairs, all funded by right-wing foundations, big corporations, and super-rich individuals. Many universities and colleges have direct investments in corporate America, holding stock portfolios worth billions of dollars. Such bountiful endowments are to be found especially in elite Ivy League schools like Yale, Harvard, Brown, Columbia, and others. More and more college presidents and other top administrators are drawn directly from corporate America with no experience in teaching, research, or university administration. Their salaries are skyrocketing and their fringe benefits are increasingly lavish, including such things as year-long paid leaves at full salary. Some administrators and faculty earn handsome sums as business consultants. Corporate logos are appearing in classrooms and student union buildings. Academic-based scientific research is being increasingly funded and defined by corporations that have a vested interest in the results of the research. With its financing of chairs and study programs, private industry is influencing who is hired and what is taught. Meanwhile, library budgets, scholarships, course offerings, teaching staff, and student services are being cut back. At most universities and colleges, tuition has climbed more than 30% in the last decade years. Tenured and other full-time faculty positions are being replaced with underpaid part-time adjuncts. Some 40% of all college teachers are adjuncts, working for no benefits, and carrying heavy teaching loads for paltry pay.
Okay, so that is section 1. Let me get my notes here. Okay, so section 1, corporate plutocracy. I'm going to start this out by reading a little Lenin from State and Revolution. Democracy for an insignificant minority, democracy for the rich. That is the democracy of capitalist society. If we look most closely into the machinery of capitalist democracy, we see everywhere in the petty, supposedly petty, details of the suffrage. That is, residential qualifications, expulsion of women, etc. In the technique of the representative institutions, in the actual obstacles to the right of assembly, public buildings are not for paupers. In the purely capitalist organization of the daily press, etc., etc., we see restriction after restriction upon democracy. These restrictions, exceptions, expulsions, obstacles for the poor seem slight, especially in the eyes of one who has never known want himself and has never been in close contact with the oppressed classes in their mass life. And 9 out of 10, if not 99 out of 100, bourgeois publicists and politicians come under this category. But in their sum total, these restrictions exclude and squeeze out the poor from politics, from active participation in democracy. Okay, so there is no democracy in capitalism, or rather, as the title of this book says, it is a democracy for the few. The wealthy of this country do have a great, more close to entire say and representation in government. The people are left out because they do not have the capital to convince the politicians to change things. It is in the politicians' best interest to do what the ones with power say, and as Parenti so graciously has been laying out in this book, under capitalism, that is not the people. There are 5 media companies. I say 5, you'll look them up, they'll say 6, but since Paramount bought CBS and Viacom, they all merged, so there's 5 now. So there's 5 that own almost all the media in the United States, like 90% of the media. And those 5 are AT&T, Paramount, Comcast, Disney, and News Corp. However, if you ask the question, who are the shareholders of insert one of the 5 media owners here, you get interesting, okay, maybe not that interesting results. The top shareholders all include 2 investment groups, BlackRock and Vanguard. So then you ask the question of BlackRock and Vanguard, and a whole new layer of shareholders come up, some repeating from the lower levels, including the fact that Vanguard owns a significant amount of shares in BlackRock and vice versa. The whole thing is convoluted on purpose. It keeps the rich rich and the poor out of the game. All right, hold on. I'm going to do a little reading. So this is a Parenti article that he wrote. It's called Monopoly Media Manipulations. He wrote it in May 2001. I'm just going to read the first couple of paragraphs. In a capitalist democracy like the United States, the corporate news media faithfully reflect the dominant class ideology both in their reportage and commentary. At the same time, these media leave the impression that They are free and independent, capable of balanced coverage and objective commentary. How they achieve these seemingly contradictory but legitimating goals is a matter worthy of study. Notables in the media industry claim that occasional inaccuracies do occur in news coverage because of innocent error and everyday production problems such as deadline pressures, budgetary restraints, and the difficulty of reducing a complex story into a concise report. Furthermore, no communication system can hope to report everything. Hence, selectivity is needed. To be sure, such pressures and problems do exist, and honest mistakes are made. But do they really explain the media's overall performance? True, the press must be selective, but what principle of selectivity is involved? I would argue that media bias usually does not occur in random fashion. Rather, it moves in more or less consistent directions, favoring management over labor, corporations over corporate critics, affluent whites over low-income minorities, officialdom over protesters, the two-party monopoly over leftist third parties, privatization and free market reforms over public sector development, U.S. dominance of the third world over revolutionary or populist social change, and conservative commenters and columnists over progressive and radical ones. All right, so that's one of his articles. It's michael-parenti.org has a lot of these articles up. He was doing a blog for a little bit, and so all that's up on that too. Back here. Okay, so I'm gonna play section 2 now.
Ideological orthodoxy. In academia, politically radical faculty, and even students, have suffered politically motivated negative evaluations and loss of stipends, grants, and jobs. Professors, journalists, managers, bureaucrats, and most other professionals who wish to advance their careers learn to go along with things as they are and avoid espousing radical views that conflict with the dominant economic interests of capitalist society. One agent of political socialization is the government itself. On frequent occasions, the US president or some other official will feed us reassuring pronouncements about the economy or alarming assertions about enemies who threaten us from abroad or from within. Assisting their efforts at political indoctrination are the news media. Although we are often admonished to think for ourselves, we might ask if our socialization process puts limits on doing so. Ideological orthodoxy so permeates the plutocratic culture that it is often not felt as indoctrination. The most effective forms of tyranny are those so deeply ingrained, so thoroughly controlling, as not even to be consciously experienced as constraints. In a capitalist society, mass advertising sells not only particular products but a way of life, a glorification of consumer acquisitiveness. Born of a market economy, the capitalist culture downplays cooperative efforts and human interdependence. People are expected to operate individually but toward rather similar goals. Everyone competes against everyone else, but for the same things. Individualism in this corporate-dominated culture refers to acquisitiveness and careerism. We are expected to get what we can for ourselves and not be too troubled by the problems faced by others. This attitude, considered inhuman in some societies, is labeled approvingly as ambition in our own and is treated as a quality of great social value. Whether or not this individualism allows one to have much control over one's own life is another story. The decisions about the quality of the food we eat, the goods we buy, the air we breathe, the prices we pay, the wages we earn, the way work tasks are divided, the modes of transportation available to us, and the images we are fed by the media are usually made by people other than ourselves. People who occupy privileged positions within the social hierarchy become committed to the hierarchy's preservation and hostile toward demands for a more equitable social order. Economically deprived groups are seen as a threat because they want more, and more for the have-nots might mean less for the haves. Class bigotry is one of the widely held forms of prejudice in American society and the least examined. The plutocratic culture teaches that material success is a measure of one's worth, and because the poor are not worth much, then society's resources should not be squandered on them. In capitalist society, the poor are generally seen as personally deficient, the authors of their own straitened circumstances. Rarely are they considered to be the victims of poverty-creating economic forces, high rents, underemployment, low wages, unattended illnesses, disabilities, and other such features of the free market. As the American humorist Will Rogers once said, "It's no crime to be poor, but it might as well be." In a society where money is the overriding determinant of one's life chances, the drive for material gain is not merely a symptom of a greed-driven culture but a factor in one's very survival. As corporate power tightens its grip over the political economy, many people have to work still harder to keep their heads above water. Rather than grasping for fanciful luxuries, they struggle to provide basic necessities. If they need more money than was essential in earlier days, it is partly because essentials cost so much more. Because human services are based on ability to pay, money becomes a matter of life and death. To have a low or modest income is to run a higher risk of insufficient medical care, homelessness, and job insecurity, and to have less opportunity for education, recreation, travel, and comfort. Thus, the desire to make it, even at the expense of others, is not merely a wrong-headed attitude but a reflection of the material conditions of capitalist society wherein no one is ever really economically secure except the super-rich, and even they forever seek to secure and advance their fortunes through further capital accumulation. For those who enjoy the best of everything, the existing politico-economic system is a smashing success. For those who are its hapless victims, or who are concerned about the well-being of all and not just themselves, the system leaves a great deal to be desired.
Okie dokie. Hold on, let me get way too many things open right now. Okay, so that was section 2 called Ideological Orthodoxy. So in the last chapter, chapter 4 that we went through on Tuesday, I brought up how I view capitalism like a progressive disease, that every new violence placed upon the people are just accepted as necessary. Parenti sums up my thoughts when he says, "The most effective forms of tyranny are those so deeply ingrained, so thoroughly controlling, as not even to be consciously experienced as constraints." Hey, Rottweiler. All right. Individualism is advertised as a great thing in the American way of life. However, we are not allowed to be ourselves. I know this firsthand as someone that has ADHD. I masked my whole life. I held in impulses. I was hardly ever just being myself because myself was not what the people wanted from me. In education, we are all taught the same thing, not taught to individual strengths. In the working world, we are made to conform, even to the point there is a uniform, whether it is a company branded one or a dress code. We are told from the cradle to the grave what is expected of us for the most part, and if we don't follow the path laid out for us, if we step off that path even just a bit, we are shunned from the individual conformism of the quote-unquote good little boys and girls, completely leaving out the theys, living under capitalism. When anti-communists view Marx's writings, they believe Marx, as an American philosopher Massimo Pigliucci says, reduces humans to social insects, devoid of individualism. But what Marx was actually doing was seeking a way to avoid alienation, and in this was pointing out how the worker cannot possess individualism in capitalism. Capitalism reduces the worker to a cog in the machine. Just the fact that it is called a way of life means they don't expect you to be individuals. They expect you to do what you are told, to conform into what life they need you to have in order for you to give them the life they feel they so rightly deserve. To go with the theme of the book, I guess we can call the U.S.'s form of individualism for the few. The more we dig into just how many lies we are fed, are you seeing how we the people, are hardly even an afterthought in anything, because the owning class and their cohorts aren't suffering, and they do not possess the empathy needed to even begin to understand the struggles of those they step on. Or is it just me? Advertising is just another form of control, pushing people further from the myth of individualism. Advertising pushes consumerism onto the people, making them believe they need every little gadget that comes out. I fall victim to this, especially when I am in a highly anxious mood, which is a lot. With mass production from industrialization, they needed a way to convince you to buy stuff. In the 1920s, Edward Bernays comes out with the concept of public relations, coming up with many of the advertising techniques used to convince people to buy more. He also went to, he was used to better the Mussolini and the other guy's image too. So first they perfected the ads for print and on the sides of the roads with billboards. In the 1920s, the Ford dealers loved the idea of using billboards. Even that, like, billboards were used like way back in the 1800s, but they are like, these are the people that will buy cars because they're driving and they see these billboards. So here's a great place for us to advertise. So it was really kind of Ford that pushed the pushed the billboards out on us. Then on the radio, then onto TV, and finally onto social media. So keeping up with the Joneses was an American way of life. All right, I'm going to play section 3 now.
Corporate rule and ruin. Some examples. The modern giant corporations portray themselves as benign entities that provide the jobs and goods and services we all need. In fact, the multinational corporation is nothing more, or less, than an organized instrument of plutocracy to maximize the accumulation of profits and wealth, without much regard for the well-being of the workforce, the general public, or the environment. Consider this incomplete rogues gallery of corporate America. Walmart, the world's largest retailer, exploits international sweatshop labor, paying subsistence wages, discriminating against women in pay and promotions, denying workers time for breaks, and forcing employees to work, off the clock, unpaid overtime. Walmart has been forced to pay at least $352 million to settle numerous wage and hour lawsuits. Walmart's calculated underpricing regularly drives smaller family-owned stores out of business. Cargill, an international food and agribusiness giant, has been raking in record profits. The price fixing that Cargill imposed on the food supply it controls caused shortages and riots in low-income communities across the globe. Cargill, like Monsanto, forces others in the food and agricultural industry to buy genetically engineered products. In India, Cargill used free trade laws to deny farmers the right to use and sell the natural seeds they gleaned from their own crops and had relied on for centuries. ExxonMobil has long been big oil's worst polluter and has supported the junk science of front groups that deny global warming. In 2008, ExxonMobil reported the largest annual profit in U.S. history, $45 billion. Coca-Cola, number one soft drink producer in the world, is now aggressively expanding into bottled water. The corporation is buying up and drying up sources of fresh water in many parts of the world for the purpose of marketing its soda and bottled water. AIG is a giant insurance company whose reckless speculation and predatory lending practices led to its own collapse, sending shockwaves through the global economy and prompting $182.5 billion in taxpayer bailouts in 2009. Goldman Sachs was a big seller of mortgage-backed securities at the height of the real estate bubble. When the economic crash came in 2008, 2009, Goldman Sachs received $10 billion in taxpayer bailout money, then promptly paid out $6.5 billion in bonuses. Merck, one of Big Pharma's largest profit makers, is facing tens of billions of dollars in liabilities for marketing potentially deadly medicine while concealing the health risks from consumers. UBS is a Swiss bank that played a key role in major Ponzi schemes and international swindles. UBS also assisted more than 50,000 of America's wealthiest individuals to commit tax evasion by sheltering more than $14 billion in assets. The above examples show only fragments of the profiteering and malfeasance perpetrated by business corporations in a capitalist system that claims to be the progenitor of democracy and prosperity. Later chapters provide a fuller picture of what corporate America has been doing to us and the rest of the world.
Okay, I just need to clean this up a little. Okay, here we go. All right, so that was section 3, corporate rule and ruin, and he gave some examples. All right, so corporations in the 80s put out this fuck you attitude. Look up Chainsaw Al Dunlap because I cannot show you the photo of him because he is armed. And in the early 2000s, some claim corporations are rising above their shareholders and becoming the corporations for the people. Ford was even one of these corporations in the 2000s, the same Ford corporation that broke unions and supported and made money off the 1930s Germany. calling it capitalism with a conscious or conscious capitalism when it ends up just being greenwashing or pinkwashing or just washing in any color shows you just how deep corporations and their shareholders' conscience goes, which is barely a scratch in. In a Guardian article called Whole Foods Represents the Failures of Conscious Capitalism from 2017. This is right before they totally went under and Amazon bought them. You once again get the sense that the corporations don't actually want to do good, as they want to blame the conscious Oh, did I? Yeah. You read the article. I'm sorry, I just got lost a little bit in my own notes. Okay, so in the Whole Foods article, you start reading it. You once again get the sense that corporations don't actually want to do good, as they want to blame the conscious capitalism, even while mentioning the actual reason Whole Foods failed. The reason being the free market in the form of competition from cheaper organic options from retail stores like Kroger and Walmart. So it wasn't their conscious capitalism. It was just that the capitalists, the shareholders, the ones that make the profit, didn't want to use any more of that profit. So it's easy to shun that. They can get rid of that, and they can say, see, it's not working. It actually made the store look worse. No, Andrew Yang mentioned. Okay, David. So that was that. And then much like the social programs getting watered down or taken away because they don't serve the capitalist system, once the crisis of capitalism is solved with said social programs, conscious capitalism wasn't going to survive. The capitalist economist Milton Friedman states why. This is actually pulled from the Joel Bakan's book that I brought up on chapter 4 called The Corporation, and the long second name to it, but you can find it under Joel Bakan and The Corporation. It's actually free copies of it up on the archive.org. Friedman thinks that corporations are good for society and that too much government is bad. He recoils, however, that at the idea that corporations should try to do good for society. A corporation is, this is him talking, a corporation is the property of its stockholders, he told me. Its interests are the interests of its stockholders. Now, beyond that, should it spend the stockholders' money for purposes which is regards to as socially responsible, but which it cannot connect to its bottom line? The answer, I would say, is no. There is but one socially responsibility for corporate executives, Friedman believes. They must make as much money as possible for their shareholders. This is a moral imperative. Executives who choose social and environmental goals over profits, who try to act morally, are, in fact, immoral in their eyes, in the shareholders' eyes. Okay. And by the way, speaking of Amazon, what an immoral beast that is. They exploit their employees and engage in union busting. They wouldn't allow drivers enough time for bathroom breaks, so they were forced to pee in bottles. They have crushed smaller businesses both online and on Main Street, and Bezos buying the Washington Post helps him control the narrative. So, all right. We're on to section 4, people. We're moving right along tonight.
Left, right, and center. Political ideologies traditionally have been categorized as rightist, centrist, and leftist. Let us consider these broad tendencies, without pretending to do justice to all their shadings and ambiguities. What is called the political right consists of conservatives, corporate elites, and many other affluent persons who advocate free market capitalism and defend big business as the mainstay of the good society. Free market capitalism is essentially the unregulated laissez-faire variety in which private profit investments have priority over almost all other social considerations. Conservative ideology preaches the virtues of private initiative and self-reliance. Rich and poor pretty much get what they deserve. People are poor not because of inadequate wages and lack of economic opportunity but because they are lazy, profligate, or incapable. The conservative keystone to individual rights is the enjoyment of property rights, especially the right to make a profit off other people's labor and enjoy the privileged conditions of a favored class. Conservatives blame many of our troubles on what billionaire Steve Forbes called the arrogance, insularity, the government knows best mentality in Washington, D.C. Everything works better in the private sector, they maintain. Conservatives are usually thought of as people who want to preserve the privileges and traditional practices of the upper strata. Most conservative ideologues today, however, might better be classified as reactionaries, having an agenda intent upon rolling back all the progressive gains made over the last century. They want to do away with most government regulation of business, along with environmental and consumer protections, disability and institutions and ideologies. 53. Retirement support, minimum wage laws, unemployment compensation, occupational safety, and injury compensation laws. They assure us that private charity can take care of needy and hungry people, and that there is no need for government handouts. Conservatives seem to think that everything would be okay if government were reduced to a bare minimum. Government is not the solution, it is the problem, they say. In actual practice, however, conservatives are for or against government handouts depending on whose hand is out. They want to cut human services to lower income groups, but they vigorously support all sorts of government subsidies and bailouts for large corporate enterprises. They treat economic recession as just part of a natural cycle. They admonish American workers to work harder for less, and have not a harsh word about the devastating effects of corporate mergers and buyouts, financial swindles, the exportation of our jobs to cheap labor markets abroad, and the increase in economic hardship for working people. Conservatives and reactionaries may want a weak government, but they also want a strong authoritarian state. They are not against strong government measures to restrict dissent, suppress protests, keep us under surveillance, and regulate our private lives and personal morals, as with anti-abortion laws and bans on gay marriage. They generally support harsher police methods, more severe prison sentences, and more vigorous use of the death penalty. They want government to require prayers in our schools, subsidize religious education, and bring God into public life. They blame the country's ills on secular immorality, homosexuality, feminism, liberal elites, and the loss of family values. The religious right supports conservative causes. In turn, super-rich conservative interests help finance the religious right. Most conservatives are enthusiastic backers of gargantuan military budgets and a global network of U.S. military bases. They claim to be more patriotic than their more liberal opponents, supporting military attacks against other nations. They seem to equate this bellicosity with patriotism. Truth be told, when it comes to war, conservative ideologues prefer to let others do the fighting and dying. Such was the case with President George W. Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, commentator Rush Limbaugh, and scores of other prominent right-wingers who took pains to avoid military service during the Vietnam War. Not all conservatives and reactionaries are affluent. People of rather modest means who oppose big government because they do not see it doing anything for them will call themselves conservatives, for want of an alternative. As one newspaper columnist writes, they think that government has a prime responsibility to protect their right to kill themselves with guns, booze, and tobacco, but at minimal responsibility to protect their right to a job, a home, an education, or a meal. 10. Conservative politicians talk about upholding values, but they make no effort to root out corruption in the business world or protect the environment or lend support to working families. For all their verbal promotion of heterosexual family values and traditional morality, numerous conservative leaders have been caught in adulterous affairs or homosexual liaisons. More toward the center and left center of the political spectrum are the moderates and liberal centrists, who might be lumped together. Like the conservatives, the centrists accept the capitalist system and its basic values, but they think social problems should be rectified by piecemeal reforms and regulatory policies. Along with conservatives, many liberal centrists support free trade and globalization, thinking it will benefit not just corporations but everyone. They support big military spending and sometimes back military interventions abroad if convinced that the White House is waging a moral crusade against some newly defined evil and is advancing the cause of peace and democracy, as with their support of the massive 78-day U.S. bombing of women, children, and men in Yugoslavia in 1999, and the interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq. Many liberals see a need for improving public services and environmental protections. They support minimum wage laws, unemployment insurance, and other wage supports, along with social security, nutritional aid for needy children, occupational safety, and the like. They say they are for protection of individual rights and against government surveillance of law-abiding political groups, yet in Congress, they sometimes have supported repressive measures and have gone along with cuts in programs for the needy. Some of them also have voted for subsidies and tax breaks for business. At other times they deplore the growing inequality and poverty and have resisted the reactionary rollback of human services, the assaults on social security, and the undermining of both labor unions and environmental protections. Institutions and ideologies. 55. Further along the spectrum is the political left, the progressives, socialists, Marxists, and others. They want to replace or substantially modify the corporate capitalist system with a system of public ownership, in which many of the large corporations are nationalized and smaller businesses are under cooperative ownership. Some progressives will settle for a social democracy, the kind of political economy that exists in Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland, and other Western European nations, with strong labor unions, good work conditions, and firm controls on business to safeguard the public interest. They argue that untrammeled free market capitalism has no goal other than the accumulation of capital by the privileged few, at everyone else's expense. A democratically responsive social democracy, say the progressives, has an important role to play in protecting the environment, advancing education, providing jobs for everyone able to work, sufficient aid to the disabled, along with occupational safety, secure retirement, and affordable medical care and housing. Many leftists and progressives tirelessly denounce the now defunct communist societies as models for US socialism. Yet some progressives note that whatever the shortcomings and crimes of communist societies, they did offer some things that would have been worth preserving: a guaranteed right to a job, no hunger or homelessness, free medical care and free education to the highest level of one's ability, subsidized utilities and transportation, free cultural events, and a guaranteed pension after retirement. Entitlements that were abolished soon after the communist countries opened themselves to the plunder and harsh inequality of the corporate free market. Most US leftists, social democrats, and liberals refrain from uttering a positive word about the former state socialist societies or revolutionary communism in general. Many of the more doctrinaire seem little worried about global capitalism, the system that today has the world in its baneful grip. Instead, they wage constant battle against something they call Stalinism. To them, Stalinism is an evil that lurks in many nooks and crannies on the left and must be rooted out. Some of the doctrinaire leftists appear happiest when attacking other leftist groups for being ideologically impure, insufficiently militant, or of tainted political genealogy. Generally speaking, revolutionary socialists are distinguished from liberal reformers in their belief that our social problems cannot be solved within the very system that is creating them. They do not believe that every human problem is caused by capitalism, but they are convinced that many of the most important ones are. Capitalism propagates conditions that perpetuate poverty, racism, sexism, and exploitative social relations at home and abroad, they argue. To the socialist, US military expansionism abroad is not the result of wrong thinking, but the natural outgrowth of profit-oriented capitalism. They believe that US foreign policy has been quite successful in crushing egalitarian social reforms in many countries in order to keep the world safe for transnational corporations. An ideological tendency that defies ready classification on a lineal political spectrum are the libertarians, who resemble anarchists in their insistence that government is the source of all our ills. So they call for the privatization of social programs and just about everything else. But libertarians differ from free market reactionaries in their opposition to strong police enforcement and to US military interventions abroad.
Okay, so I'm going to say on this, this is one place I'll diverge from Parenti on. Not that I think Parenti's analysis, going back the 15 years where this book was written, I too would have said that progressives, at least some of them, would be, not just settling for the SOCDEM, but like think of it as like a step towards socialism. We're on the left, but so many progressives stop at SOCDEM now with the push with the DSA and everything. It's just been like people seem to be stuck here. And even senators who once gave a speech about regulation bad to the Federalist Society and gleefully admits she's a capitalist any chance she gets, I'm talking about Elizabeth Warren, has been labeled progressive. And so the American progressives belong to the right of center with the rest of the capitalist bootlickers. So says I. Parenti touches on, but doesn't get into much here, the anti-communism that plays out in our socio-political economic system. If you want to dig deeper into the how anti-communism has shaped our country, Parenti's first book, it was the Anti-Communist Impulse, I read from it above, gets into how it was used to keep the people down in the capitalist system going, at least through the 1960s, and it was published in 1969. I'm going to read another little bit from there, and this is just I want to read. It's a quote from a textbook, so you can. He just wanted to show. So he was talking about these professors who were so worried about being what was being taught. Like the history that was being taught was turning into this actual history where that's not, this one guy was saying like our job was to keep it neutral, keep a neutral attitude and stuff like that, which meant just, right for the victors, right? So, hold on. A textbook published in 1963 and used today. So this is 1969. In at least one Long Island high school treats young readers to pronouncements such as, okay, this is from the textbook. The communists do not care about peace. The communists hope that the man in the street will think that communists could not possibly be preparing for war when they talk so much and so beautifully about peace. People who say one thing and believe another are called hypocrites. Communists are among the greatest hypocrites in history. And to be fair, like if you go back, like you go to like Turry says something on this about how it's not peace. Like peace is not what the communists want. Peace always is a bourgeois thing, and it always just still hurts the people. It doesn't change things. So that is not even something that we'd be pushing. So I'll continue here. The years since World War II have given more than enough evidence of the determination of the Soviet Union to destroy the United States and all that it stands for. It should be recognized, of course, that the great danger from communists in the United States does not come from those who openly belong to the party. Rather, the most dangerous communists are those who long ago dropped from sight or perhaps were never even in the party's records. These, and probably others sent to this country by the USSR, are awaiting the day when they will be given the order to destroy the dams and bridges and factories and military bases of the United States. It still hasn't happened. In the meantime, they will try to live as quietly as possible. They do not want to attract attention, which they will certainly get if they join the party. This is amazing because this is like a history book. So this is not history. This is propaganda straight out. The Chinese communists are willing to take the risk of atomic war because China is a backward, underfed nation of almost 700 million people. Of course, tens of millions of the Chinese people would be killed in such a war, but this does not particularly bother the Chinese communist leaders. Yeah, so that was these guys all worried about the liberal teachings, and this is what was being taught in New York in the 60s. So, yes, Parenti is so inspiring to me. When I feel downtrodden, he gives me hope. I feel you there. I have my friend loves reading Lenin, and it soothes her. Like if she's upset, sometimes I read Lenin to her. So, so I get that. I like Parenti myself. So, all right. So where are we now? All right. So about 10 years ago, I could start seeing the anti-communism rising again. We've had standing ovations on the denouncement of it. We've had bills like the one last December under Biden called the Crucial Communism Teaching Act, which passed the House with a bipartisan vote of 327 to 62. The bill makes optional education materials available through the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. So we all knew who the victims of communism were. To help educate high school students about the dangers of communism and totalitarianism and how those systems are contrary to the founding principles and freedom of democracy in the United States. All right, so here was the points they were making. Communism has a long, dark history of political suppression, persecution, and violence, projection, that is being swept under the rug by malign foreign actors infiltrating American education institutions. This was just written in December. It was probably written before that, but it was approved in December. For example, the Chinese Communist Party is using Confucius classrooms, the K through 12 equivalent of the CCP's Confucius Institutes on college campuses, to disseminate propaganda in American schools and cover up the atrocities of past communist regimes. I looked at what's being taught here. It's like when I took Chinese Civ, that's what's being taught. It's like the cultural, they want, American Chinese people to learn Mandarin, stuff like that. It's them learning their culture. Over 500 K-12 schools across the United States have allowed the CCP to establish itself in their halls under the guise of Confucius classrooms, which have especially concentrated close to U.S. military bases. Well, maybe if we didn't have so many freaking bases, I don't know what to tell you. As one member of the CCP Politburo put it, Confucius Institutes are a part of the Chinese foreign propaganda strategy. Oh boy. Okay. Support for communism should have no place in American schools. Unfortunately, troubling statistics show, this is still part of the bill, 28% of Gen Z hold a favorable opinion of the term communism compared to just 6 and 3% for boomers and silent Gen. 18%, I love how Gen X is always left out, but 18% of Gen Z thinks communism is a fairer system than capitalism and deserves consideration in America. And 19% of Gen Z believes that dictatorship is and they mean the dictatorship of a proletariat, but they're not putting that in the bill. Dictatorship is the best political system compared to only 3% of the silent generation. So, that's the bill. So the anti-communism growing because of a sock dem Bernie gaining popularity shows you just how desperate the neoliberals are to keep the people down and their system in place. All right, I'm going to start section 5.
Public opinion, which direction? The opinions most Americans have about socioeconomic issues are decidedly more progressive than what is usually enunciated by political leaders and right-wing media pundits. Surveys show substantial majorities strongly favoring public funding for social security, nursing home care, and lower-priced prescription drugs. Substantial majorities support unemployment insurance, disability assistance, job retraining, child care, price supports for family farms, and food stamps for the needy, while opposing tax cuts for the very rich and privatization of social services. Large majorities want improvements in managed health care and favor a universal health insurance program run by the government and funded by taxpayers. The public generally supports a stronger, not a weaker, social safety net. By nearly 3-1, the public rejects cutbacks in Medicare and Social Security. Large majorities feel that the gap between rich and poor is growing, and that government has a responsibility to try to do away with poverty and hunger, that abortion should be a decision made by a woman and her doctor, and that racial minorities should be given fair treatment in employment, but not special preferences in hiring and promotion. After many years of strong support for organized labor, Americans became much less positive toward unions during the grim days of the 2009 recession. 60% agree that large corporations wield too much power. A majority believes that corporate executives care very little about the environment, are given to falsifying company accounts, and are lining their own pockets. Large majorities say that corporations have too much influence over government. Most Americans are concerned about the environment. A majority also favors the death penalty and being tough on crime. Yet 60% agree that the president has no right to suspend the Bill of Rights in time of war or national emergency. By a 5-3 majority, Americans support the idea of a public health plan to compete with private insurance. Only 25% of Americans say banks are honest and trustworthy. In sum, on many important issues, a majority seems to hold positions at variance with those maintained by ideological conservatives and reactionaries and closer to the ones enunciated by liberals and progressives. Opinion polls are only part of the picture. There is the whole history of democratic struggle that continues to this day and remains largely untaught in the schools and unreported in the media. It is expressed in mass demonstrations, strikes, boycotts, and civil disobedience, targeting such things as poverty, unemployment, unsafe nuclear reactors, nuclear missile sites, and U.S. wars abroad. There have been mass mobilizations in support of legalized abortion, women's rights, gay and lesbian rights, and environmental protections. There have been organized housing takeovers for the homeless, protests against police brutality, and non-compliance with draft registration. The Selective Service System admitted that over the years some 800,000 young men have refused to register. At the same time, major strikes have occurred in a wide range of industries, showing that labor militancy is not a thing of the past. This is not to deny that there remain millions of Americans, including many of relatively modest means, who succumb to the culture of fear propagated by right-wing reactionaries. They fear and resent gays, ethnic minorities, feminists, immigrants, intellectuals, liberals, peace activists, environmentalists, evolutionary scientists, communists, socialists, labor unions, Muslims, and atheists. They swallow the reactionary line that government is the enemy, and they are readily whipped into jingoistic fervor when their leaders go to war against vastly weaker nations. Yet this society does not produce large numbers of conservative activists. There are no mass demonstrations demanding tax cuts for the rich, more environmental devastation, more wars, more tax cuts for the rich, or more corporate accumulation of wealth. Despite the mind-numbing distractions of a mass culture and the propaganda and indoctrination by plutocratic institutions, Americans still have concerns about important issues. Political socialization often produces contradictory and unexpected spin-offs. When opinion makers indoctrinate us with the notion that we are a free and prosperous people, we, in fact, begin to demand the right to be free and prosperous. The old trick of using democratic rhetoric to cloak an undemocratic class order can backfire when people begin to take the rhetoric seriously and translate it into democratic demands. There are those who love justice more than they love money, those who do not long for more acquisitions but for a better quality of life for all.
All right, so that is section 5. We have just one more section after this. Let's see what I got going here. So section 5 is public opinion, which direction? And he said the cui bono. I love the cui bono. All right. When he is going through the examples of both rich and poor having this fictitious same say over public policy, I thought back to chapter 2 when we were talking about the framers of the Constitution and how much they really felt that the people, the mob, the rabble, should have no say because they did not know what was good for them. Sure, on paper, laws can look fair. It is how they are applied that matters. We are fed a lie of a representation in government, but we just have to look at policies and the majority of the people want and how we are told that we couldn't possibly get as we send even more money out to the war machine. Biggest example is a universal single-payer healthcare. If capitalism breeds democracy in itself, how come so many suffer under a capitalist regime here in third world countries? Let's continue reading from Lenin's State and Revolution from where I left off on section 1. Marx grasped this essence of capitalist democracy splendidly when, in analyzing the experience of the commune, he said that the oppressed are allowed once every few years to decide which particular representatives of the oppressing class shall represent and repress them in parliament. But from this capitalist democracy that is inevitably narrow and stealthily pushes aside the poor and is therefore hypocritical and false through and through, forward development does not proceed simply, directly, and smoothly towards greater and greater democracy as the liberal professors and petty bourgeois opportunists would have us believe. No, forward development, i.e. development towards communism, proceeds through the dictatorship of the proletariat and cannot do otherwise, for the resistance of the capitalist exploiters cannot be broken by anyone else or in any other way. And the dictatorship of the proletariat, i.e. the organization of the vanguard of the oppressed, as the ruling class for the purpose of suppressing the oppressors, cannot result merely in an expansion of democracy, simultaneously with an immense expansion of democracy, which for the first time becomes democracy for the poor, democracy for the people, and not democracy for the money bags. The dictatorship of the proletariat imposes a series of restrictions on the freedom of the oppressors, the exploiters, the capitalists. We must suppress them in order to free humanity from wage slavery. Their resistance must be crushed by force. It is clear that there is no freedom and no democracy where there is suppression and where there is violence. Engels expressed this splendidly in his letter to Bebel when he said, as the reader will remember, that the proletariat needs the state, not in the interest of freedom, but in order to hold down its adversaries. And as soon as it becomes possible to speak of freedom, the state as such ceases to exist. Democracy for the vast majority of people and suppression by force, i.e. expulsion from democracy of the exploiters and oppressors of the people. This is the change democracy undergoes during the transition from capitalism to communism. So, if you truly want democracy, you would want the system that actually makes it possible. You wouldn't fight to prop up a system that just keeps devolving into fascism. All right, now we're going to listen to the last section.
Democracy, form and content. Americans of all political persuasions profess a dedication to democracy, but they tend to mean different things by the term. In this book, democracy refers to a system of governance that represents in both form and content the interests of the broad populace. Decision makers are to govern for the benefit of the many, not for the advantages of the privileged few. The people hold their representatives accountable by subjecting them to open criticism, the periodic check of elections, and, if necessary, recall and removal from office. Democratic government is limited government, the antithesis of despotic absolutism. But a democratic people should be able to enjoy freedom from economic, as well as political, oppression. In a real democracy, the material conditions of people's lives should be humane and not insufferable. Some writers would disagree, arguing that democracy is simply a system of rules for playing the political game, with the constitution and the laws as a kind of rule book. They say we should not try to impose particular economic agendas on this open-ended game. This approach certainly does reduce democracy to a game. It evades the whole question of cui bono? Who benefits from this game? The law in its majestic equality, Anatole France once observed, prohibits rich and poor alike from stealing bread and begging in the streets. And so the law becomes something of a fiction that allows us to speak of the rights of all, divorced from the class conditions that often place the rich above the law and the poor below it. In the absence of decent material conditions, formal rights are of little value to millions who lack the means to make a reality of their rights. Take the right of every citizen to be heard. In its majestic equality, the law allows both rich and poor to raise high their political voices. Both are free to hire the best-placed lobbyists and Washington lawyers to pressure public office holders. Both are free to shape public opinion by owning a newspaper or television station. And both rich and poor have the right to engage in multimillion-dollar election campaigns to win office for themselves or their political favorites. But again, this formal equality is something of a fiction. What good are the rules for those millions of people who are excluded from the game? We are taught that capitalism and democracy go together. The free market supposedly creates a pluralistic society of manifold groups, a civic society that acts independently of the state and provides the basis for political freedom and prosperity. In fact, many capitalist societies, from Nazi Germany to today's third world dictatorships, have private enterprise systems but no political freedom, and plenty of mass destitution. And the more open to free market capitalism they become, the poorer they seem to get. In such systems, economic freedom means the freedom to exploit the labor of the poor and get endlessly rich. Transnational corporate capitalism is no guarantee of a meaningful political democracy, neither in third world countries nor in the United States itself. When it works with any efficacy, democracy is dedicated to protecting the well-being of the many and rolling back the economic oppressions and privileges that serve the few. Democracy seeks to ensure that even those who are not advantaged by wealth or extraordinary talent can earn a decent livelihood. The contradictory nature of capitalist democracy is that it professes egalitarian political principles while generating enormous disparities in material well-being and actual political influence. Some people think that if you are free to say what you like, you are living in a democracy. But freedom of speech is not the sum total of democracy, only one of its necessary conditions. Too often we are free to say what we want, while those of wealth and power are free to do what they want to us regardless of what we say. Democracy is not a seminar but a system of power, like any other form of governance. Freedom of speech, like freedom of assembly and freedom of political organization, is meaningful only if it is heard and if it keeps those in power responsive to those over whom power is exercised. Nor are elections a sure test of democracy. Some electoral systems are so thoroughly controlled by well-financed like-minded elites or rigged by dishonest officials that they discourage meaningful dialogue and broad participation. Whether a political system is democratic or not depends not only on its procedures but on the actual material benefits and the social justice or injustice it. Institutions and Ideologies 59. Propagates. A government that pursues policies that by design or neglect are so steeply inequitable as to damage the life chances of large sectors of the population is not democratic no matter how many elections it holds. It should be repeated that when we criticize the lack of democratic substance in the United States, we are not attacking or being disloyal to our nation itself. Quite the contrary. A democratic citizenry should not succumb to state idolatry but should remain critical of the powers that work against the democratic interests of our nation and its people.
Okay. So that is the last section of chapter 5. It's called Democracy, Form, and Content. So I didn't write too many notes on this one. I figure I covered a lot above, but anyone who believes there's freedom of speech in the United States never tried to speak out about anything that mattered to the people. Look at what is happening at the protests that have always happened at protests. All right, I'm going to actually read to you from this. This actually goes probably better with his with the last section, but it's called it was written in 2011 by Parenti, and it's called Profit, Pathology, and the Disposable Planet. And as I said, these were all up on this michael-parenti.org. A lot of these articles and stuff you can find there. I do have I am putting together a whole library, and I use Notion so I can make it a web page, so I can make it available to everyone. It's not quite pretty yet, and I'm actually transcribing some of his books that are out of print, so that we don't lose them. And yeah, so I will at some point be putting that out to everyone, so you can go and look at that. Use the one resource there, because no one's really keeping up his Michael Parenti account right now. So it's called Profit, Pathology, and the Disposable Planet. So this is about an environmentalist. So some years ago in New England, a group of environmentalists asked a corporate executive how his company, a paper mill, could justify dumping its raw industrial affluent into a nearby river. The river, which had taken Mother Nature centuries to create, was used for drinking water, fishing, boating, and swimming. In just a few years, the paper mill had turned it into a highly toxic open sewer. The executive shrugged and said that river dumping was the most cost-effective way of removing the mill's waste. If the company had to absorb the additional expense of having to clean up after itself, it might not be able to maintain its competitive edge and would then have to go out of business or move to a cheaper labor market, resulting in the loss of jobs for the local economy. It was a familiar argument. The company had no choice. It was compelled to act that way in a competitive market. The mill was not in the business of protecting the environment. It was in the business of making a profit, the highest possible profit at the highest possible rate of return. Profit is the name of the game. As business leaders make clear when pressed on the point, the overriding purpose of business is capital accumulation. As we keep pointing out, me and Michael here. To justify its single-minded profiteering, corporate America promotes the classic laissez-faire theory, which claims that the free market, a congestion of unregulated and unbridled enterprises, all selfishly pursuing their own ends, is governed by a benign, invisible hand that miraculously produces optimal outputs for everybody. The free marketers have a deep, all-abiding faith in laissez-faire, for it is a faith that serves them well. It means no government oversight, no being held accountable for the environmental disasters they perpetuate. Like greedy, spoiled brats, they repeatedly get bailed out by the government, some free market, so that they can continue to take irresponsible risks, plunder the land, poison the seas, sicken whole communities, lay waste to entire regions, and pocket obscene profits. This corporate system of capital accumulation treats the Earth's life-sustaining resources, arable land, groundwater, wetlands, foliage, forests, fisheries, ocean beds, bays, rivers, air quality, as disposable ingredients presumed to be of limitless supplies, to be consumed or toxified at will. As BP has demonstrated so well in the Gulf of Mexico, he calls it Gulf of Mexico, catastrophic considerations of cost weigh so much more heavily than consideration of safety. As one congressional inquiry concluded, time after time, it appears that BP made decisions that increase the risk of a blowout to save the company time or expense. So that, like I said, is from the article Profit Pathology and the Disposable Planet, which you can find up on the michael-parenti.org. I think Truth Out and Z Magazine published him a lot too. So you can find a lot of just his shorter works, the articles there. So anyhow, that is chapter 5. We have finished chapter 5. And I am putting up chapter 4 and 5 this weekend onto both Spotify and YouTube. They're both under the just Parenti Stuff is the account. And so if you missed any, or if you want to share it with anyone, they can listen on there. And I will continue to do these on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I do, like, if you ever want to come up and have a discussion, or if you want to talk on a specific chapter and stuff like that, reach out to me. Yeah, I mean, I will take up and do discussions and stuff like that. I've had like Rick and Cutie and Ash up and stuff like that. So people are welcome to come up and have a discussion about what Parenti's talking about, I guess. So I hope that, I don't know. I hope you enjoyed that. So I will talk to you all later next week, I guess. Bye.